Hello everybody, my name is Jeff H. Malum and welcome to a different kind of video. I have been waiting so long to do this because I was very excited to do this. Today I will be ranking all of the novels that I had to read for university. And I've been in university for a long time now, and I still am, but since most of the literature modules are done for me, there's only one left in German literature, but I was okay with not including that today. So, what does that mean? I will be showing you all the novels not really in order. I will just pick one randomly and put it on here. There will be a ranking staple over here. And what is very important to say before we start is that I will only be including novels. So obviously, if you're studying anything with literature, you have to, deal with many texts of all sorts. So not just novels, but also short stories, poems, secondary literature, of course, non-fiction, movies, music, video game, whatever is considered a literary text. And I will only be including novels and plays. There are some exceptions, but when we come to them, I will explain why I still wanted to include them. One more thing before we start, from this big reading list that I had, there are actually 4 books which I did not finish reading. So I will show them to you before we start. Those are 3 German books and 1 English book. And obviously I will not include them in the ranking. And what is also important to be said is that I will only be including my obligatory literature. So obviously there were many more texts that were recommended to deal with or talked about, or there were many books that I read in inspiration from university. For example, I have some novels from Kornbluth in my shelf, or from Bradbury, but I didn't have to read them in university, so I will also not including them here, except for one exception also. But with all that being said, I think we should start with the ranking, or rather with the 4 books that will be excluded from the ranking. And I will start with the English one. It is this one. It's called Second Glance by Jodi Picoult. I don't know how to pronounce that name actually. This is a novel that I had to read for a science fiction eugenics seminar in American literature. However, it was in an extremely stressful semester, and we had a never-ending reading list with lots of short stories and lots of whatever we had to read, lots every week. And for this 1 week, we actually only had like 7 days to finish this book, and it's not very short, and I really couldn't do it. So my lecturer, she was giving us an alternative. If we wouldn't be able to finish the book, we could do some individual research on a certain topic, and then come prepared to class with that instead of the novel. And since I was in trouble with time, I decided I could not finish it, but I really want to finish it one day. But I will not include it in the ranking. And same thing was with this one. This is a German book that I had to read in a children's and youth lecture, literature lecture. It's called Tigermilch, or in English Tiger Milk, basically. It is a youth novel. It's not that thick, but also here for the exam we were allowed to basically choose from several texts, and I decided against this one. And It's by Stephanie de Velasco, and I want to read it. It's on my reading list, but I couldn't finish it in the semester. And then there are 2 other German books, also in a seminar of, well, popular culture books in German. And also there we had to read many, many novels, but we could decide on which of them we were to take the exam. And I decided against taking it in Die neuen Leiden des jungen W. by Ulrich Plenzdorf and Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, because I actually kind of dislike both authors. And yeah, those are very short, and I probably will read them one day, but yeah. Now, one final thing before we start with the actual ranking list. This whole thing is a big thing, because it's not just 2 or 3 novels that are included in the ranking. So since I'm talking a lot, as you can see, this video will probably be split into 2 parts, one coming this week and one coming in exactly 7 days. So yeah, don't be mad with me if we don't reach number 1 today. But maybe I will be very fast and we can do this in that time, but I don't believe so actually. So let's get started. I will just pick a random book and we will start doing the ranking over time. Let's start with this one. This is Lord of the Flies by William Golding, a novel from modern time / post-war time, post-war literature. It's not that thick, it's only around 300 pages, but well, there's a lot of space between the lines, so it doesn't really feel like 300 pages. And it's basically about a group of students that fled a war by plane, and then the plane crashes and they are stranded on a deserted island. And it's kind of interesting in my opinion, because it is a novel that goes from a very utopian setting, you know, there are no adults, no grown-ups, and the children can do whatever they want, to a very dystopian setting towards the end. And I really enjoyed it. So it's easy to say that for now it's on, well, place number 1. Okay, so as you see, I will be saying some things about each book, but I will not go into that much detail, except for maybe some examples. Oh, by the way, I had to read this for a literary history class, where we were going through all the different literary periods of British literature. Okay, let's get going with what do we have here? It's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard, and it is more like a play in, I think, 3 acts or 4. I think it's 3, and it's basically you could say a fan fiction to Hamlet. And if you've seen some of my videos before, you know that I am not a big fan of Hamlet and Shakespeare. And to me, it seems like Tom Stoppard is a fan of those books, of that book and this author. And yeah, he was trying to adapt to the style with, you know, stuff. Oh, let's be honest, I didn't like it. I didn't like it, so it's somewhere down here. We'll see what happens. Next, we have a book that I actually don't have here right now because my girlfriend currently has it. It's called Momo. It's a German novel by Michael Ende. Also, I would say something between children's and youth literature, probably children's literature, but some that actually works pretty well for adults as well, because it has those, you know, those, you can read it as actual capitalist critique, so criticism towards capitalism, and also, you know, towards how adults spend their time, or rather waste their time, and how, you know, in the image of the romantic child, how those, you know, how children are in their purest form of nature, and how they are actually having a better life than adults. And yeah, obviously you don't read it like that as a child, but as an adult you can still enjoy this book a lot, or I did personally when I read it first. So yeah, I liked it, but I would say I didn't like it as much as Lord of the Flies, so I will for now be putting it in the middle between those two. And once again, we'll see what happens. I think for the start now, it's gonna be, well, very easy to fill this ranking, and it doesn't need much explanation, right? I like it less than Golding, but more than Steward, so it's easy to put it in the middle. But once there are like 20 books here, it's gonna be tough, or tougher. Let's actually get going with one of the exceptions that I wanted to include. This is Beowulf. I have shown you my version of Beowulf before in my lectures. Now, why is this an exception? Because it's not a novel and it's not a play. It's basically a very, very long poem, an extremely long, never-ending poem. And it's in Old English. Now, why did I want to include this? I can't really say, probably because it's so long that it can be considered a novel, more or less. And because it's a very important thing, a very important and big inspiration for lots of modern literature. You just have to look at Tolkien's Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. There's so much inspiration coming from Beowulf. And actually, I was very, very glad that I had to deal with Beowulf, because I probably would have never read 3,000 lines of that in my free time. But thanks to university, I did. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a little hard to rank for me now, because it was at the start of literature, of literary history. So creativity was, let's say, different back then. So it's hard to compare it to some of the texts that will still be coming. And obviously it cannot be a place number one like that. But still, I liked it definitely more than Steward's Rosencrantz and Goldilocks, so I will put it over here, like that. But I will have both Momo and Lord of the Flies above it. Okay. Next up, we have a German book, which is, well, you can already see the book looks terrible. And this is because I actually not only had to read this for university, but I also had to read this in school. So this is actually my book from school many, many years back. And yeah, this is why it looks so terrible. This is Faust, the first part by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. I don't think I have to say lots of that, because the Faust or later adaptations are like Dr. Faustus. It is probably one of the most well-known books or plays in history, so I don't think I have to say much about it. And while usually I dislike older German literature, Faust is one of the very, very few examples that I actually really enjoyed. And but it's so hard to rank in comparison, because I actually, due to, well, I had to read this in school, I almost feel a little nostalgic towards Faust, and maybe I like it more because of the nostalgia and because of the teacher that I had back then, and I probably would like it less if I read it today for the first time. I don't know. But yeah, it feels right to have it not over Momo, but over Beowulf. I see. This is going to be a lot of putting something in the middle, right? Because right now, basically everything was, well, there was a very good book at the start, a very bad one at the end, and everything at the second, and everything else was very much in the middle. But I'm very positive this is gonna change. And it's gonna change now, because I will continue with a German book as well. And like with Beowulf, this is more like a very long poem. Or is it a poem, or was it a play? Or was it something in between? I actually can't remember. But it's also not too small, not too short. And this is a German book from medieval times. It is called Villahelm by Wolfram von Eschenbach. And I cannot really say what this is even about. It is from medieval times, and I think it is like a reinterpretation of how was it called? Tristan and Isolde, I think this was. Was that the name? Sorry, I forgot it right now. But I don't really have much to say about it, except for that this book reminds me of not an exam, but an essay that I had to write, a very long essay. And this was, I'm sorry to say that, but that was a pain in the ass. So I will have to put it down there where it belongs. I'm sorry. Next up, we have Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Also, probably a book that everybody, maybe not everybody has read it, but I believe that everybody has at least heard of it before. One of the very, very, very few books that are well known from the Enlightenment period, I would say. You know, the book about that boy that gets stranded on a deserted island that basically introduced this, well, stranded on a deserted island theme that is found so many times in all kinds of texts and literature nowadays, not just in books, but also in movies, also in video games, everywhere. So this is a classic, obviously. And actually, I have to say that I don't remember that much. I mean, I remember what it is about, you know, Robinson Crusoe and that boy he finds. But I don't even remember how the book ends. And I remember that I read it in a rush. And I remember that I didn't like it that much. It wasn't terrible, but I felt it was kind of boring. It had some very interesting moments and was, yeah, probably a very good mirror of its times. But if someone asked me if I would recommend to read this, I would say for historical reasons, yes. But if you just want to enjoy a good novel, pick something else. So I will be putting it beneath Beowulf, because I would say read Beowulf. It's fun to do that. But yeah, I think it's a good spot for Robinson Crusoe. Next up, we have a novel that I just want to speak about briefly, because it was not really part of my obligatory reading list. It is Casino Royale by Ian Fleming. Why did I include it if it wasn't on my obligatory reading list and I only wanted to talk about them? It was because I had an exam. It was an oral exam in literary history kind of module. And for that, I had to choose 10 texts which I wanted to talk about in the exam. And for some of them, we had the option to pick, texts that we did not talk about in university. Of course, we had to have deep knowledge about it, also, very theoretical knowledge, university level knowledge about a book. And I decided that I wanted to analyze Casino Royale on that university depth level, and have part of my exam about this. So this was my private decision, and I do not regret it, but it was not on the obligatory reading list, so I will put it over here to the books that, are excluded from the rating. Now, we have a novel that I have, an awkward relationship with. It is called The Circle by Dave Eggers. Now, if you have been watching some of my videos before, you know that I am not a big fan of that novel. Absolutely not. I had to read it for a dystopian American literature seminar, and both my lecturer and me, as well as many others from the class, we agreed that it is somewhat interesting and fun to read this novel, and there are so many traces of criticism and that are very important, and that there are very very, very interesting ideas and thoughts in this novel. But the execution, the writing of The Circle was so bland. I don't know how else to put this, but I felt like this is really great idea and terrible execution. Partly because of how it is written, but also because how superficial the characters are designed and the story and the world. I don't know. And also that Dave Eggers seems to have this urge to explain all of his metaphors. I don't know. I couldn't enjoy The Circle much, but I do not regret having read it, because it has, led to some interesting discussions in class. Now I'm struggling if I still wanted to put this above Robinson Crusoe, because I still somewhat enjoyed it and I like dystopian stories. I will be putting it above Robinson Crusoe just because I feel like it. This is a very emotion-driven ranking, but I'm okay with that. Next up, we have another novel that I actually already talked about in another video, in a review. This is the German version. It is called Der Fänger am Roggen, but it is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I don't have the English version with me right now, but I read the English version. And the German version, I just have it here as well, and didn't have the English version with me right now. I don't think I have to say much about this, because if you want to know more about my opinion on this novel, just go to my channel and check out the review. It was just a couple of weeks ago. I'm speaking about it there in detail. But I can definitely say that I liked it so much that for now I will be putting it up here. Next up, we have another German book, or rather a German play. It is called Maria Steward by Friedrich Schiller, and I probably have never felt as much neutrality and non-emotion towards a book than with this one. Well, actually, I remember that I got through the novel on the play, and afterwards I was like, okay, it was okay to read it. But then when we talked about it in class, I realized I didn't really like it. And now I remember that I don't remember anything about it, actually, except for all the characters, and I think I remember the ending. But it was one of those books that you read and then you talk about and then you forget about it. You kind of still remember the name that you've read it, but yeah, and then that there are some interesting things between the characters, but well, as I said before, I am not a big fan of, well, classic German literature except for Faust. So for Maria Stewart, I would also say, if you are very interested in German literary history, you should definitely read it because Schiller is very important to, well, that kind of stuff. And it is probably one of his most memorable works. So for that reason, I want to say, yeah, go ahead and read it. But if you just want to pick a novel for entertaining, yeah, I would say choose something else. So I will be putting it underneath Robinson Crusoe. And since my camera just overheated, I will say goodbye for today. This was the first part of my university ranking. The second part will come in 7 days, and it will probably be the exact same length if I have a look at the novels that are still, well, sitting next to me. So yeah, thanks for watching and see you next week with part 2. Goodbye, read you all soon.